for me, my type structure, I thought I had to be like positive and happy and free. And like, I would only be okay if I was those things. And I would only be loved if I was those things. The Enneagram reveals this opportunity for us to actually experience a more deep, more complex way to be. If we step out of this kind of, it's almost like an armor that we put on to protect ourselves.
You are listening to Veggie Doctor Radio, and this is episode number 142. Welcome to Veggie Doctor Radio. I am your host, Dr. Yami, board-certified pediatrician, certified lifestyle medicine physician, certified health and wellness coach, author, speaker, mother, wife, and human being. I passionately believe in the power of diet, habits, and mindset in sparking and sustaining well-being and joy in our lives. This podcast combines expert interviews and thoughtful monologues to explore plant-based nutrition, lifestyle medicine, parenting, mindset, and other exciting and fun topics. I hope that these episodes inspire you, uplift you, and equip you with the knowledge and tools to live your best life. Are you ready to get started? Let's do it. Hello, veggie lovers. Welcome back to Veggie Doctor Radio. We are now in the month of love, February, and this month I'm going to be focusing on relationships because relationships are so important. We often think about relationships with other people, with our friends and family, romantic relationships, but one relationship that's very important is the relationship we have with ourselves. Do you accept yourself the way you are? Do you understand yourself, why you do the things that you do? This episode is going to be about the relationship with yourself, specifically through learning the Enneagram. Have you heard of this? The Enneagram? I know it's a really strange word. Maybe you've heard other people talk about it and you're like, the Ennea what? What are you talking about? So I learned more about the Enneagram about a year ago, and it's made such a huge difference in my life, not just the relationship with myself, but also in my marriage. It's just been revolutionary. It's really opened my heart and my mind and just taken me to a whole nother level of appreciating life, appreciating the people around me, understanding them a bit more, having more empathy for them, but also for myself. So this episode, I want to focus on ourselves. And so I brought Sarajane Case, who is the founder of Enneagram and Coffee, and also the book, The Honest Enneagram, which came out in 2020. So this episode will be about the Enneagram and more specifically, how we can use the Enneagram to get to know ourselves better and to accept ourselves. So I hope that you love it. Definitely a very introductory episode on the Enneagram. So you're not going to learn about all the types or anything. It's more about what it is, why it may benefit you to learn more about it. So I hope that you love it. Before I tell you more about Sarajane Case, let me remind you, especially for my new listeners, if you're looking for resources on plant-based nutrition or even nutrients of concern, you are looking for ways that you want to decrease meat in your diet, decrease dairy in your diet, you need some ideas for breakfast, lunch, for snacks, those kinds of things. I have lots of great resources at dryami.com/free. That's DOCTORYAMI.com/free. So go on over there, check out my resources, download the PDFs that you feel are going to help you most in your life right now. There's a lot of different offerings. I want to also thank you so much for being a loyal listener. And I would like to give a shout out to Invite Plants to Every Meal, who gave me a 5-star review on Apple Podcast entitled, "Look No Further, She's the One." Invite Plants to Every Meal says, To say that finding Dr. Yami was priceless is an understatement. Her genuine and fun personality, along with an extreme wealth of knowledge, keep you informed and aware. Her podcasts give you a similar feeling of talking to a friend for advice. She shares information in a way that anyone can understand and feel like part of the conversation. Promoting a plant-based lifestyle is key for many of us, especially as moms and parents. To find someone willing to sit down and plant the seeds of plant life is an amazing find. And ended with a smiley face. I love the puns. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Invite plants to every meal. I appreciate that review so much. And thank you for being a loyal listener. I know this month is going to be a little different because I'm not talking about plants this month, but one of the things about this podcast is I want to give you resources to live your best life. Eating plants is one of those. So definitely eat plants and eat your beans, get your sleep, get your exercise, but also improving our relationships because connection is so important. But before we can connect to other people, we have to get to know ourselves better. The more we get to know ourselves, the more that we're able to accept ourselves, the more we have to give, which maybe it seems kind of selfish in some ways. Like, we're with ourselves all the time. Why do you want to get to know yourself? But there's some things you may not realize or understand about yourself that whenever you're doing some of this personal development work, you understand better. You understand your motivations and you understand what kind of decisions or what kind of actions you can take to improve your life, to go in the direction that you want to go for your goals and your dreams, your aspirations, whether that has to do with your business or your health and wellness, or if it just has to do with your family life and your relationships with your friends and family. So this episode is starting that conversation on relationships. So it's a little bit different, but I think it's going to be super, super valuable. So this week, we're going to be talking about relationship with yourself. And then next week, we will be discussing romantic relationships. The following week, it'll be friendships. And then the last Sunday of this month, it's going to be parent-child relationships. And I know that that's gold for all our parents out there that want to know, how can I improve this relationship? What kind of things can I do? All of this is super helpful for me, and I hope that it will be helpful for you. Well, before I play my conversation with Sarajane Case, let me tell you more about her. So Sarajane is an author, speaker, podcaster, and now YouTuber based out of Asheville, North Carolina. She's been featured in publications like Apartment Therapy, The Every Girl, Parade Magazine, and was named a 2018 Person on the Rise by Honeybook. With an Instagram account of over 500,000 followers, a podcast that regularly stays at the top of the charts in self-help, and a book that launched in April of 2020, Sarajane is a rising leader in the self-help industry. You can find more from her on Instagram at Enneagram and Coffee. Her podcast, Enneagram and Coffee, can be found on iTunes and Spotify, and her website, enneagramandcoffee.com. Her book is called The Honest Enneagram, and you can find it wherever books are sold. Okay, so Sarajane and I talk about, like I said, the basics. What's the Enneagram? How she learned about it? How did it even come to be? What point does your Enneagram type start to develop? How early can you type somebody? This specifically for children, for those of us that have children, and we want to know whether you can type children. She talks about subtypes, and then we talk about how learning about the Enneagram can benefit us in our relationship. We talk about how numbers go from place of stress to place of rest and how it can help us in our relationships, and lots of things. The most common Enneagram pitfalls that she sees. I think this is really great. And she gives specific tools that you can use to discover your type. I think this is really important. One of the biggest pitfalls she talks about is that sometimes people take a quiz and they're like, oh, that doesn't describe me, and then they just give up. But I found personally, that I learned more about what type I was by just reading and reading and reading and reading as much as I could about the different types. And I did it on Instagram, which is a great place because you have these beautiful infographics that you can follow the different Enneagram experts and Enneagram teachers on Instagram. And every day you can learn little tidbits of every type. And that really helped me. So I just immersed myself in it, learned more about it, and I was able to really pin down what my type is, learned a little bit more about subtypes and wings and all of that. So it is a journey. And if you're interested in it, just get started and just read and be patient and don't give up. So it's a great conversation. I hope that you love it. I hope that you look into the Enneagram, find out what type you are, and that it helps you discover more about yourself. Enough from me. Let's hear the conversation between me and Sarajane Case of Enneagram and Coffee. Sarajane Case from Enneagram and Coffee. Thank you so much for joining me on Veggie Doctor Radio today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Well, this is a dream come true, actually. I've been learning about the Enneagram probably a little over a year now. When I came to it, it was one of those things people kept saying the word, and I'm like, what are you talking about? What is this Enneagram thing? It sounded really mysterious. But once I learned about it, I'm like, wow, this is for me. I loved it. I've been really delving into it. And I just wanted to find the perfect expert to come on my show so that other people can learn about this way of getting to know ourselves. So before we go any further, what is the Enneagram?
Yeah. So the Enneagram, you could compare it to something like maybe Myers-Briggs or even astrology, just like, ways that we compartmentalize or understand people. The big difference here is that there are 9 distinct type structures, but really what the type structures are telling us is what we think we have to be. So it's
Mm.
giving us this information of like, oh, this is who you thought you had to be your whole life. And the Enneagram is inviting us into not using that as a protective mechanism anymore.
Awesome. Oh, I love the way you made that distinction. I think that's really good. So, how did you get to know about the Enneagram and learn about it and become so passionate about it?
Yeah, I found it because, my husband and he was my boyfriend at the time. We were just talking to friends of ours and we were discussing the ways that we show up and the ways that we think about things. And they were like, I imagine hearing our type patterns show up in the conversation. And we're like, have you heard about the Enneagram? And so that was kind of the entry point. So I went home and we dove into it. We both took a test online and at the time it took me about 2 years to self-type,
Mm.
which I wouldn't trade for anything because taking that time to really research every single number just helped me to become so obsessed with the system as a whole. I think a lot of times when you get introduced to a system like this, you read about your type and then you walk away.
Mm.
And because it took me so long to type, I just dove headfirst into all the numbers and I just became obsessed. At the time I was coaching, so I was helping people to recover from burnout. And the Enneagram was just this amazing tool for us to go deep fast and to be able to get to not only like what are your behaviors that you're doing, but also why are we doing those behaviors? What are we trying to earn through this behavior?
That's so cool. And I love how you talked about it took you so long to actually discover what your type is because that means you were able to approach each type objectively and with
Mhm.
fresh eyes and learn about it and learn all the things about it, not just like, okay,
Mhm.
this is my type. Maybe some people might think maybe this is the best type. I'm biased that way. Okay. I'm just going to admit it. All right. But anyway, so that's really neat how you were able to explore it that way in a different way that
Mhm.
most of us go, okay, what's our type? Then we just learn a lot about that type and maybe we don't know about other types. What do
Mhm.
you love about the Enneagram the most?
I think the Enneagram is this amazing language that I think it gives us ways to ask better questions, ways to know ourselves and to know other people, in a level to a level of intimacy that I haven't experienced with anything else. When I read books or descriptions of my type, and it kind of penetrates into the deeper makings of my soul in a way that I haven't experienced with anything else. The other really amazing thing about the Enneagram is it's showing us this thing you thought your whole life you had to be. So for me, my type structure, I thought I had to be like positive and happy and free. And like I would only be okay if I was those things. And I would only be loved if I was those things.
Mhm.
The Enneagram reveals this opportunity for us to actually experience a more deep, more complex way to be if we step out of this kind of it's almost like an armor that we put on to protect
Mm.
ourselves.
That's so beautiful. I love the way that you explain that. Well, I am all about evidence base and I'm all about research. And on this podcast, I talk a lot about that. But the Enneagram might be a little bit different. So, can you tell me a little bit about the history of the Enneagram? Who developed
Mhm.
it? Is it scientific? Is it evidence based? Is there any research on it at all? Where did this come from?
I think that's a great question. There's early symbols or things that kind of show up like the Enneagram as early as like the Greek, like ancient Greek tradition. And the earliest thing that we could really point back to is this man called George Gurdjieff, and he is kind of our first um, kind of founding father of the Enneagram, I think is the easiest way to say it. And then kind of simultaneously, there's this man called Oscar Ichazo, and they were kind of building the Enneagram separately, but doing the same work. And then Claudio Naranjo, who he really just passed away a couple of years ago, he kind of modernized the Enneagram and brought it into the mainstream. And he was a psychologist. And so he's the one who kind of paired the work of the Enneagram with like modern psychology kind of ideals. And then now we just have all of these like modern, most of like our major schools of thought or tradition around the Enneagram, which there are several, are run by psychologists. So it's kind of more in that world. And they've all each kind of done their own research and their own studies. But I like to be really upfront and say, like, I think it's just a series of observations.
Yeah.
Like, I honestly, it's kind of got this like kind of amorphous, confusing background. Um, and I really just believe it's like we watched people and we interviewed people and we talked to people, not me as we, but like the Enneagram community. And there were patterns and they found the patterns and they put them together.
Yeah, but it works. I mean, it's just so
Yeah, it's
kind of it's weird.
creepy.
It's weird. And I am one of those people, I'm kind of weird in that I love science and I love research, but then there's just some things in life that maybe you can't even explain, but it just works.
Mhm.
So this might be
Yeah.
one of those things. Tell me a little bit more about where does the Christianity part come into it? Because I do see
Mhm.
that there's some origins with Christianity, and sometimes you see that in some of the influencers and experts on the Enneagram
Mhm.
weaving that into their teachings.
I think I would say the Christianity piece really started with Richard Rohr, who is I don't think doesn't teach on the Enneagram as much anymore, but years ago he did, and then he trained people like Suzanne Stabile who are more in that world, and they brought kind of Enneagram into the Christian mainstream. And I think that I'm personally not religious, but I would say that people I come from a religious background, and a lot of that work for me in Christianity was about like self improvement, understanding how I could be a better person, and so I think that they kind of go hand in hand. And from my experience in the Christian world, there's a lot of community, and the Enneagram is so helpful in community because you're better able to understand your limitations, the ways that you judge and perceive other people, and it makes community much easier.
Mhm. And I guess it's just another way that together we can do personal development,
Mhm.
self-improvement, and for those people that are religious, get closer to God in that way, but
Mhm.
don't have to be religious to learn about the Enneagram. It doesn't necessarily have to go hand in hand, right?
Mhm. Yeah. And, so there are some Christians who are very anti Enneagram and some who are very pro Enneagram. And
Mm.
some, I think it's, I wouldn't correlate them necessarily. However, I think it can be useful in your walk with God if that's your choice.
Awesome. Thank you for explaining that.
Yeah.
So one of the burning questions I have, because I'm a parent and I have two children, ages
Mhm.
11 and almost 16. At what point does one's type develop, and can it ever change or evolve?
hmm You know, I am a big fan of this one theory of the Enneagram that's not universally accepted, but it is one that I'm a big fan of, which is called the soul child, which is this idea that who we are as children is the number that we move to in rest. So in the Enneagram, you have a number that you move to in stress and a number you move to when you feel like at ease or you feel safe. And so the idea being that there's this number that you are when you are secure, and then as you grow, you learn it's actually not safe to be that type. And so you put on the armor of the type that you've chosen and that you end up in as adulthood. Some
Mhm.
people say this can happen as early as like pre-cognitive thinking, like before you can really articulate your thoughts or feelings. You've experienced things that have shown you can't be this type. So there's not a ton of like definitive answers around what age. But what I would say is we really can't type anyone else. So they have to be able to type themselves.
Mm.
And because it's so motivation based and internal, that when they get old enough, I would say 10, 11, maybe 12, where they can really start to think for themselves, why did I make the decision that I'm making here? What is driving the decisions that I'm making? But then so when we get into the reason I bring up Soul Child is because these younger years, we could be experiencing their type, but we also could be experiencing kind of their pre type, the type that they're going to end up protecting in the long run. So the way we have a 9-year-old, and the way that we've approached it is to just ask him often. Why did like, let's talk about this. We don't like to use the questions why because they sound accusatory, but like, what were you thinking about? What was going on here? We have like a decent understanding through those conversations with him about what his type might be.
Mhm.
But we will never tell him what we think it is because we want him to tell us.
Yes, yes. And that was one of the things I wanted to talk about later. But before we get to that, um, I don't think I fully understood the soul child thing. So I'm glad that you
Mhm.
explained that, because now that makes a lot more sense to me how that might develop and evolve. But say
Mhm.
once you're an adult and you have this armor type, or the type that you develop to as an adult, can you be more than one type? Because I think that that is something that's confusing for a lot of people. They just go online, they take a test, and they're like, I'm a 742 or something like that. So, can you be more than one type? And then, are there subtypes?
Yeah. So, um, simple answer, you have one type. It's the same type your whole life. That doesn't mean that you are the same your whole life. It just means that you are likely going to be in relationship to this pattern your whole life. However, there is a theory called tri-type theory, which is again very contested. This is why there's so many schools of the Enneagram. So we can go so deep, which I love. But the tri-type theory suggests that there's 3 centers of the Enneagram: head, heart, and gut. And each of those centers has 3 types. So our gut center has types 8, 9, and 1. Our heart center has types 2, 3, and 4. And our head center has types 5, 6, and 7. Tri-type theory suggests that maybe we have a dominant type in each center. So sometimes people will say, I lead with type 7, and then I am like a 7, 9, 2, and that gives you kind of like a bigger picture according to that theory.
Mm.
I am of the thought that like focus on the one, like pick
Mhm.
your dominant type is really the one that you're in consistent relationship to. And at the end of the day, we all have some of every type in
Yeah.
us. And so we can exercise our empathy muscle and our growth muscle by really figuring out what in me is every type and
Mhm.
how can I explore that. But step one, like figure out your dominant type and really see what needs to kind of be improved there, what can be worked on there. And yes, there are subtypes. Subtypes are maybe one of my favorite elements of the Enneagram. What this looks like is each type has kind of 3 distinct ways that we survive. So it's like self preservation, one to one or intimacy, and then social, which is like, where am I in the social standing? Every type has 3 distinct subtypes of those, and they show up in different ways. So intimate types tend to be more fiery, more like they make direct eye contact, a little more passionate. Self preservation types are more focused about keeping themselves safe, having a safe family unit. And social subtypes, again, are focused on where are they in the social standing. And so that's going to add a little bit of a distinct flavor to your number.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's important to talk about, because I think when people look at this ways of looking at personality, some people bristle at like being labeled, or like, I can't
Mhm.
fit into a category. You can't put me in a category. But really, it's just so much more expansive than that. I don't
Mhm.
really see any two people as being exactly the same. Not
Mhm.
only are they're different subtypes, but like you said, you just approach life in a different way. So whenever
Mhm.
you say focus on the one type, one of the things that's a little different with the Enneagram, like you pointed out before, is to understand like our motivation. What's our main desire? What's our main fear? Is that the way that you explain to people how that they can discover their own type? Like, what process did you take during those 2
Mhm.
years that you were typing yourself?
Yeah. Honestly, I will say it took me 2 years because I second guessed my first understanding. So
Mm,
I will say I took the test online, which you can do that. Just don't expect your result to be accurate.
mhm.
If you get the result, you read the description and you're like, "Meh, you haven't been typed correctly." Because when you read the description of your type, like it is awkward and it is deep and it feels like you're exposed.
Yes.
So when you get that feeling, you know you're there. And I got that feeling. I typed as a type 2, which a lot of like female identifying people in our culture do. Um, but I typed as a type 2. I was like, I can see this kind of, I think I'm nice. So because type 2s are the helper. And so I was like, oh, I'm friendly, I'm fun, I'm easy to get along with. And then I read my husband, he typed as a 7, and I read his type, and I was like, I feel like someone read my journal out loud. Like my whole life has been watched and it was written on this piece of paper. And so I honestly, like, my gut knew the moment I read the description of my type. It was just everyone else perceives me as warmer than that description would describe, or
Mhm.
more selfless. And that's because in each of those subtypes, each subtype has a counter type, or each type has one subtype that looks different in behavior than they do in motivation. So
Mm.
for me, it took me so long because my behavior didn't necessarily always match my motivation because I was counter type. So I will say I was a little bit weird in that sense. So when I'm telling someone else what they should do, I either say, hire a professional, let them walk you through a typing process and let them guide you through that. That's the quickest way. However, I wouldn't trade my journey for anything. So I will say, if you take a quiz online, use that as your starting point, not your end point. This is where you begin, and then go in deeper and really just start to read about like what are the fears, what are the motivations, and focus on the underneath, the motivators, not the behaviors. Because again, that's where I got confused, is I was focusing on my behavior, which my behavior was, one, I was a counter type, and two, I've grown, since I've learned these things without the Enneagram. I learned to be more selfless because that's what a good person does sometimes, but that wasn't maybe necessarily my first choice. And so going underneath and really focusing on the motivation, the basic fear, will get you there a little bit faster.
Yeah, and that brings up my thoughts from when I first took a quiz. So I was typed, or my top 3 possibilities were 4, 2, and 7.
Hmm.
And I think too, like, sometimes what might happen to us is that we see types that we'd like to be like. Like,
Hmm.
I really would like to be more helpful to other people.
Same.
Honestly, I'm pretty kind of self-centered, and I really wanna take care of myself first. But so I think sometimes maybe we see other types and we're like, "Man, I kinda wanna be more like that." And so
Hmm.
I think that can be a little distracting sometimes too.
Hmm.
So that just made me think of that when you talked about the 2, because it happened to me too.
Yeah, yeah. And I will say as a 7, like, I have a pretty high self-regard, like, it's just kind of naturally, and so I think if I think something's good, like, "Oh, I think it's good to be helpful," then I must be helpful because, like, I'm awesome. So every type is gonna have, like, a different bias, but that's kind of I have a positive bias on most things.
I love it. I'm a type 7 too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I
totally
guessed.
understand how that works. Okay. So, in your opinion and your experience with this, how can learning your Enneagram number, your type, how can that benefit you? How can it
Mhm.
improve your relationship with yourself?
Mm. I think again, the first piece of this being you realize that you've thought you had to be something, right, in order to earn love or acceptance. And most of the time, this thing that we felt like we had to be, we thought was the right way for everyone to be. And
Mhm.
so I'll use myself as an example, but like as a seven, like positive thinking was the thing. Like that is the way to be a good person. That is the way around the world. Keep your spirits up. And there's a high side to that. That's amazing sometimes. And sometimes it does me a disservice because I'm not willing to go into the deep, dark pit of emotion and especially not in front of anyone else. And so a lot of my self acceptance happened, like deeper self acceptance had to happen through that, like letting someone see me and my messy parts, letting someone see me like crying on the floor on a bad day,
Mhm.
which is something that was very private for me before. It was like I would like come to a party and I would like have a good time. I'd show up late, I'd leave early, and then I'd go home. And like any sad feelings I had, either I didn't feel them at all or I would hide them for I keep them private. The moment I was allowing myself to be seen in this like darkness or in this messiness, and allowing myself to love myself there and just let myself be okay there, that's when like the deep self acceptance could happen. And I think for some types, it can happen a little bit more. Twos struggle with like, can I give myself time and space to just love, to give myself my own attention? Sevens, we don't struggle with that as much, right? Like I can give myself time and space, but can I still like myself when I'm complaining? Can I still like myself when I'm angry? That's a little bit harder.
Yes. Self-acceptance is gold. I
Mhm,
feel like it's the entry point to so much growth
mhm,
because once we understand why we do some things,
mhm,
it's not because we're bad or any of those things. It's just because that's how we learn to do it. And I
mhm,
feel like the Enneagram has helped me so much on that self-acceptance journey,
mhm.
And I was the kind as a type 7 that there's never enough of anything. And now for a very important message. Hey, veggie lover, if you are looking for free resources to guide you on your plant based and healthy living journey, go to dryami.com/free for tons of free downloadable PDFs. Hundreds of people have taken advantage of my tips to help them reduce meat and dairy consumption, navigate eating out, and build satisfying plant based meals. Download one or download them all, and don't forget to share with friends and family. dryami.com/free. And now back to the episode. So
Yeah.
I'm going to do everything. I'm going to experience everything. I'm just going to do it all. But then I would wind up just stressed and overwhelmed.
Mhm,
And then I would just eat my feelings because I didn't like feeling that way. So it was like
mhm,
this vicious cycle. And I was like, what's wrong with me? And so I think
mhm,
understanding why I felt the need to do that just helped me relax, be like, oh, it was just like this realization, like, wow, that's just the way I learned it.
mhm,
And it doesn't necessarily mean I have to keep doing that.
mhm,
So, talk a little bit about this. You talked a little bit about it before, like, but this rest and stress or like these
mhm.
growth patterns, because I feel like I've experienced that too. My husband's a type 5. So it's so interesting. And I read about how type 7s, when they're in a place of growth, they learn to be a little bit more like the type 5s, which
Mhm,
is really interesting to me. But all these different types can have a pattern of growth where they might resemble or take characteristics of the other types. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. So every number, so if you look at the Enneagram symbol, it's a circle and it has 9 numbers around the outside. And each of those numbers has a line moving to another number. So I call them like the stress line and the rest line. You have one number that you go to when you're stressed out. And it's kind of like early signs of like, oh, I'm getting stressed out. And then you have one number that you go to when you feel like, oh, I feel safe, I feel relaxed, I'm comfortable here. And then that can kind of reveal the part of you that maybe you're trying to save or protect because you feel like you can open up a little more. And then I think of them also as like, this is my indicator that I need self care. So the stress move is like information that, whoa, you're in need of self care. So as a 7, I moved to type 1. Type 1 is like the perfectionistic type. They very black and white thinking, very right and wrong. So ways that I notice is I become a little bit more rigid. I become a little bit more judgmental, and I'll start to really care about where the mustard is in the fridge. Like I'm like, why is he white? Or like, we get packages and the boxes aren't put away immediately. I just get irritated and like frustrated. I'm like, oh, I am neglecting myself, or like, where have I overscheduled myself, or where have I overburdened myself? So that's our information, right? Like either where it's information that we need self-care, or sometimes we try to live out of that space. Like, oh, like if I go to the one place, then I can get more done and I can do more with my life. And that's a really stressful way to live. This like perfectionistic this place for us, every number has their own version. And then we move to type 5 when we're in rest, right? When that's the information that one, we're in a safe place. It's also the way that we can intentionally infuse self-care. So, if I start to feel disenchanted with my life or bored with my life, the more research I can do, the more information I can bring in, the more new things I learn, the more invigorated I'm going to feel, right? Or another way that this can show up is if we can intentionally choose it. We can accidentally find ourselves there because maybe we're in a good place, or we can accidentally find ourselves there because we've become complacent. And that's where that lower side of that number can come in. So I might kind of become a little bit more guarded or boundaried. And sometimes that's an intentional thing, right? Like I'm like, oh, boundaries are healthy for me. Everybody's not welcome here. And sometimes it's an accidental thing where I've slid down into just overly protecting myself and managing my energy so that no one's allowed in.
It's all a balance, isn't it? I
Mhm.
just love how you can see the same characteristics when taken to an extreme might
Mhm.
not benefit somebody as much at some times, you know? So I love seeing it's almost like you see these characteristics as more objectively, like, okay, when can this be helpful in my life? When
Mhm.
is it a sign that maybe not everything is going right?
Yeah.
And that going to type 1, I call that my control freak. Everybody at my house knows her. They're like looking at me like, "What is wrong with you today?" I take a deep breath. I'm like, "Just feeling a bit anxious today. I'll calm down. I promise." But I just
Mhm.
had the whole we open up the fridge and things are in the why did it's clearly labeled. There's a label here. That's where you put it, okay? I love it.
Relatable.
Okay, so how can learning the Enneagram help us improve relationships with other people?
Mhm. I think it's first and foremost this amazing tool for compassion. And I think that starts with ourselves too. Like, oh, I am able to now understand why I behave the way I do and why I kind of create these patterns. And once we're able to, one, offer that compassion to ourselves, but then we're more able to offer that to others. So as I read the types of the people in my life, I am now given insight into like their wounded child who needed love and who's trying to earn their safety, and I'm more able to see how I can love them better because I now know language that I can speak to them in, and I know like what they're trying to achieve, so I can reassure them that they're going to be okay in the right ways. Now, my personal favorite way to like dramatically improve your relationships in using the Enneagram is to allow yourself to be loved unconditionally by yourself. So, if we think about the Enneagram as this our type structure as the thing we think we have to be, um, And therefore we restrict ourselves in some way. So, type ones restrict themselves in imperfection. Type twos restrict themselves in their own needs getting met. Type sevens, we restrict ourselves in our access to darkness and sadness and being with our present, with our negative emotions. If we are restricting ourselves, then we are innately restricting others, right? So if I'm rejecting something in myself, I'm rejecting it in you too. So if I think about one of my pieces of my journey was when our kid would be really sad or he'd get really upset. I used to be like, just think about all the good things you have. Like, let's think positively. Let's be grateful for our life. Like, let's focus on the good. And eventually I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I am doing to him what I do to myself, right? Like when I'm having a bad day, I'm like, whoa, you shouldn't be having a bad day. You should feel better. And so I had to pause and really be like, hey, yeah, this sucks. This is a sad feeling. This is hard. And that's okay. It's okay that sometimes things are hard. And, giving him what I often have not let myself have, I think was one of the biggest shifts. And I think we can do that with everyone, but it starts with us.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. So powerful. I love that what you said. I wrote it down. Allow yourself to be loved unconditionally
Mhm.
by yourself. That's just so beautiful. And I feel like one of the reasons I learned to become a type 7 was exactly that. My
Mhm.
mother was always afraid of my emotions because I have very big emotions. And so whenever I would start to express them, she was like, just be grateful. You have so much. Plus, we're Latin American. So that's kind of like just the style. Be grateful. Don't cry. Everything is so great. And so I would just feel so bad and so guilty for ever
Mhm.
feeling sad about anything. And so I think we can perpetuate that cycle for
Mhm.
our own children too, and learning that new style, learning more about ourselves, allowing that part of ourselves that does feel some of those big emotions and feels anger and sadness and whatever those feelings, and allowing our children and our partners and our friends and family to also express those emotions as a gift that we give by allowing it in ourselves. That's just so beautiful.
Mhm.
Next question has to do with couples. Because one of the huge gifts, just like you talked about earlier, for me is appreciating and respecting my
Mhm.
husband. So,
Mhm.
my husband and I, we're going to be in May, married 20 years already. So, we've been together 24. And we've always just been really close. And the past decade, he's had a lot of stress, a lot of work stress. And he's a type 5. So, he started needing to isolate, to just
Mhm.
regenerate. And I freaked out. I was like, "You don't love me. What's wrong? I mean, what's wrong with me? Why don't you want?" I mean, anybody should feel better being around me, right? I mean, like, it just makes a lot of sense. I mean, I just don't understand why anybody would wanna be by themselves when they could just be with me. So, I never understood that. And then once I learned about his type, it was just like, boom, wow, okay, I've been trying to force him to try to regenerate his energy around this crazy chatterbox lady who's also a control freak half of the time. But he really needed that time to rest and repair when he was under so much work stress.
Mhm.
And immediately I'll calm down. I'm like, it has nothing to do with me. It has
Mhm.
nothing to do with me. I'm still cool and
Mhm.
awesome. He just needs that. So I felt like it just was miraculous from our relationship. And so now I ask
Mhm.
him, do you need your alone time? Okay, I'll close the door. I'll let you have this time. And I don't
Mhm.
take it personally. So tell me a little bit about Enneagram couples. And of course, there's going to be that question. Are there any combinations that are just like disastrous? Or are there any that are just like, wow, made in heaven?
I would say that first of all, any type can work with any other number as long as you're both working on yourself, right?
Mhm.
Like as long as you're both willing to grow, you're good to go. Um each combination is going to have like its unique recipe for how this is going to work. Everything's going to be awesome and everything's going to suck and you just have to pick which suck is the suck for you.
Yeah.
Um but I would say you really nailed it when you said like, oh, this isn't about me. I think the Enneagram offers us this opportunity to see everything they're doing is not about me.
Yeah.
This is their fear. This is their story that they've carried their whole life. And that has been validated probably by multiple sources that this is what they have to do and who they have to be. And I can not take it personally. And then I can show them the compassion that I need in return, and allow them the space to be that, but also, encourage them into new ways. And, I think about oftentimes the compliments that we give the people in our life really validate this story, this message that they are only loved in this certain way.
Mhm.
And so I think about, again, I like to speak for myself and not as much for others, but I will say, as a 7, when people compliment me and say, "Oh, you're always so fun to be around. You're so happy. You're so joyful." That is so nice to hear. And it's more meaningful for me to hear, "I love you," when you show me your sadness.
Yeah.
When you're, "Gosh, I'm so like impressed that you picked one thing and you really stuck to it." Um, those compliments offer a level of like depth that being complimented for like being a sunshine, like I've been complimented on that my whole life, and therefore it's really solidified a path for me of self-protection. And then when you say, when my husband like holds me while I'm crying and is like, "I love you. This is so good. It's so good that you're doing this." That impacts me for the
Mhm.
better. And I think that we have this opportunity to, first of all, not take it personally, right? When they show up the way they do. And two, understand why they're doing it, which I just think is the easiest way to feel compassionate for someone, understanding the pain there, the fear there. And then from there, we can even get deeper with the people we love.
Yes. No, I agree wholeheartedly. And I think the word that just comes up for me immediately, like I said before, is respect. Like
Hmm.
respect
Yeah.
that he is different than me, that his
Mhm.
motivations and his fears are different than me. And also to appreciate
Mhm.
that his body, his brain, his intentions work differently than mine, and to give space for that. He's not a
Mhm.
big person. He doesn't really enjoy all the self-improvement stuff, but, just giving him space and taking that pressure off of me having to be the sunshine that makes
Mhm.
everybody feel better all the time sort of person. Like, I don't have to do anything. I could just let him do his thing and respect that, you know?
Mhm.
So I think it's just been revolutionary in my relationship, at least for me. I don't know for him, but that's
Yeah.
so cool to learn about. One thing that I've always been curious about with Enneagram types, are there any types that resist learning about the Enneagram, or some that are just like Enneagram fanatics? Like, do you see any differences there? Like, most type whatevers really
Mhm.
love the Enneagram and dive deep into it, and then there's some that are maybe a little bit more skeptical and resist, like, the labeling or any of that kind of thing.
Mhm. I think that most of the people who struggle with the Enneagram are people who've been mistyped.
Mm,
And, it's like until you've really read a good description of your type, then you feel skeptical. Like, I don't really get it. I'm not interested. But almost every number, once you really read the description of your type, you start to feel so known that it, you need to talk about it because it's like revealed something in you. I would say that of the most skeptical that I found is type 5, just because there's a lot of things going on with the Enneagram that I think type 5s would be resistant to. It's kind of like a mystical beginning. Like, it's like, give me the evidence, give me the proof. And then it's also, it's a limit. It feels a little bit like you're being put into a box, even though once you get through it, you start to realize that you're not. There's this initial resistance that can happen in our fives. And then also, it's a lot of time and energy, a lot of like, if you're there's the one-to-one type fives, they're fascinated by human nature, right? Like, they're more inclined to go deep into the Enneagram, because that's their area of interest. But fives are going to want to give their time and attention to the things that really matter to them. They kind of think like, okay, I have this cup of energy, and as the day goes on, it gets depleted, and at the end of the day, it's going to be empty. Is this where I want to put that time? Some fives, yes, and some fives, absolutely not. So That's really the only type. And eights, I would say, are pretty quick to decide if they like something or don't like something. But most eight, most of a lot of people I know who love the Enneagram are type eights because they're like, this is it. This is explaining everything because most of their life they've been misunderstood. And so here's the information. And I think we all kind of feel that. And I think yeah, I think so. I really think the only ones I've really interacted with who are like as a whole tend to be more skeptical are fives.
Yeah. No, I agree. And you just described my husband to a T. Is he's more like, that's a waste of time. Like I'm not going to
Yeah.
use my, but I've together, I think he's seen the value of it, and
Mhm.
he may not research it himself, but I talk to him about it and ask him, is this true for you? Let me read this. Is this true for you or not? And almost 100% of the time he's like, nope, yep, that's me. And so that way I can help understand, at least I can help understand him better. And I
Mhm.
feel like it's helped our relationship that way. Okay, so this is the question that I feel like you've already, kind of referred to a little bit, but should we try to type other people?
No, we should not. And it is very hard. It is so hard. Because we're going to start to notice patterns. We're going to start to notice like certain ways that people speak or talk or mannerisms even. And you are like, oh, I think. And so it is really hard not to type other people, but it's important because it is motivation based. And like I said, so many people in my life thought I was a two or a one. And I would love to have two or one problems. And if those people in my life let me believe I was a two or a one, if I had gone on with that, then I wouldn't have improved and therefore our lives wouldn't have improved. Our relationships wouldn't have improved. So it is important to let everybody have their own experience with it because it is internal. So again, it doesn't matter what your behavior is, it's why you're doing the things that you're doing. So we just can't possibly really know. And I think that there's a level of like limiting intimacy when we decide for someone.
Mhm.
If we talked about with our kiddo, like I want him to tell me his type. I have an inclination, but I want him to tell me because I don't want to give him answers about who he is. I want to be someone who's curious about who he is his whole life. I want him to tell me, because if he gets to tell me who he is, then he gets to be the decider for his own identity. And I think that is such a safe place to become a person.
And now for a very important message. Hey, mama, if you are feeling frustrated about mealtime battles, worried that your child isn't eating enough or eating enough vegetables, afraid that your child is going to get some awful deficiency or disease because of the lack of diversity in their diet, I wrote a book that might be for you. A Parent's Guide to Intuitive Eating: How to Raise Kids Who Love to Eat Healthy is available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook through all major online booksellers. Did you know that most children are born with the innate ability to eat the appropriate amount of food to satisfy their hunger and support appropriate growth? Despite this, parents are still anxious and confused about how much and what to feed their children. In addition, many children are labeled as picky eaters or develop behaviors such as hiding and sneaking food. There's also a growing epidemic of dieting behaviors and eating disorders beginning at alarmingly young ages. In my book, you'll learn the 5 pillars of healthy eating, how to apply intuitive eating through all the stages of development, lifestyle habits that support healthy eating and body image, troubleshooting and problem solving for picky eaters, overeating, and dieting behaviors, how to create and foster a healthy body image in your children, how exploring your own body image and relationship with food will help raise an intuitive eater, and what foods to offer your child at different stages of development. A Parent's Guide to Intuitive Eating: How to Raise Kids Who Love to Eat Healthy, available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook through all major online booksellers. Are you ready for a fresh approach to feeding your child? For more information, visit dryami.com/book. And now, back to the episode. Yeah, it's almost like you're taking away their power, their individuality to do that, and
Mhm.
possibly even doing them a disservice because,
Mhm.
like you said, then they're not able to go through that path of discovery by learning themselves what their type
Mhm.
is. So, yes, thank you for saying that because I think it
Yeah.
is very tempting at the beginning of the
Mhm.
Enneagram journey. You just get so excited about it and you're just like, oh, I wonder what they are. Oh, I wonder what they are. Oh, maybe they're
Mhm.
this, you know? And so I think it's important to take a step back and be like, and understand myself and maybe talk to the person about the Enneagram if they've ever done
Mhm.
it or learned about it, but try not to tell people you're definitely this type.
Mhm. And I think it's fun to get that energy out. Like I do it with TV shows and movies and stuff like that. Like that's a good way to get that energy out and like play with that and kind of
Mhm.
develop your understanding of the types. Um, but just like, and you can do it internally, but just like let people tell you who they are and trust them, believe
Yes.
them.
Okay, I love it. So, what would you say are common Enneagram pitfalls that people experience?
I think the first one is taking a quiz, getting your result, and not relating to it and giving up. So, um, definitely go deeper. If you don't relate to the number you get when you take the test, keep reading. The second one, again, I think is typing other people. I think limiting connection with people because you replace their humanness with a number. So say, "Oh, you're being such a 2 right now." Instead, can we replace that with language
Mhm.
or questions? Can I say like, "Oh, it seems like you're over sacrificing your needs in this moment," and you don't have to do that. You're okay. You're loved. That's so much more meaningful than saying like, "Oh, you're being a 2." That's I my friend Hillary McBride, she and I did an interview and she was like, "It's objectifying." In that interview, she was like, "You're literally replacing a person with an object when you call them a number," and I think that's really meaningful to hold that and to really say, "Can I see this person as a person and not a number?" The other pitfall that we get into, I think, is not learning about the other types, really going in, reading our type, feeling like, okay, cool. And then leaving other people's, leaving the other types on the table. And this is important for a couple of reasons. One, you're going to interact with everybody on the Enneagram. So the more you know, the better in that way. But also, if we look at it this way, you have your dominant type, then most subtypes can kind of resemble another type. So that's a second one. You have the numbers on either side of you, which are called your wings that you pull from. So that's two more types. Then you have your lines of stress and rest, which are two more types. So by the end of this, right, you're connected to six numbers on the Enneagram. And some of these, if you're a counter type, maybe you have two types that you can look like. So then that's even more. So at the end of the day, like we really do have all these numbers at play in us. We have our one dominant worldview, but really we have the system within us already. And there's this amazing teacher called Dr. Jerome Delube. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Delib. And he is like teaches the brain-based enneagram and he talks about how like your brain isn't one thing. It just has quicker access points to all of the different pieces. So we talk about like you have yes, I have easier access, faster access to type 7, but then, maybe type 1's next and I have a quicker access to that. So, yeah, don't stop at just one number. Really learn the system and learn all the numbers because it's going to offer you so much more and your relationship so much more.
Wow, that's so nice. And I think also just to clarify for everybody, I mean, I hope this is obvious, but there's no good or bad number. There's no
Right.
good or bad type. And I think
Yeah.
if you're just like, oh, you're such a type 2, that's just sad because to
Mhm.
make all your happy, fun type 2s all sad and everything. So I think
Mhm.
it's just important to know that for every type, there's characteristics that may be more beneficial than others or things that you're doing when you're under stress or when you're in rest, but there's no good or bad type. And I think also
Mhm.
what you were alluding to is when we get in touch with these other types within us, but also other types on the Enneagram, get more familiar with them, it allows us to have more empathy too.
Mhm.
So maybe I
Yeah.
don't naturally, my first inclination naturally is not to be like a 2. Maybe it's not. But
Mhm.
when I learn about it, I can understand them a little bit better and understand why they're motivated to be that way. And that gives me more
Mhm.
empathy. And so just like in giving more self-acceptance to us, to ourselves, that allows us to have more acceptance for our friends and family and all our peers around us.
Mhm.
Sarah Jane, what do you wish more people knew? This could be about anything.
Mm. I wish more people knew that it is absolutely okay to get your needs met and that you are not taking from other people and that other people's wants aren't more important than your needs.
Love it.
Mhm.
Beautiful. And what personal habit are you most proud of? How did you develop it? How do you maintain it? Tell me about that.
I have a luxurious morning routine that I am just obsessed with. So that's the one. Like I journal every morning. I do yoga every morning. I have like a fantastic skincare routine that I love. It's just like so fun for me. And I have like my coffee, my breakfast routine. It's just like takes like 2 or 3 hours, and I live for it. I don't ever miss it.
Oh, that sounds so fabulous. 2 to 3 hour morning routine. Wow. It's like a spa day
It
every day is what it sounds like. That's awesome. Okay. So the last thing I want for you to give us some information. Earlier you said that there's a couple of ways that we can really know our type. Either work with a professional or delve deeper into these types. So what resources, where can you send people to? They heard this, they're like, all right, I'm dying to know what my type is. Where do I go?
is.
Send me to the place, please.
Yeah. So I have three kind of tiers of suggestion for you. The first one is I have a book called The Honest Enneagram. If you grab a copy, just read through the types. That's going to help you a lot, and that will probably give you a decent start. If you're still confused at that point, if maybe you're deciding between 2 or 3 types, I have a self-typing workshop that's on my website, enneagramandcoffee.com. And it's $29. You take the workshop, it walks you through all of the elements, and it walks you through type comparison. So, okay, I think I might be a type 1, I think I might be a type 7. Let's talk about why you would be or wouldn't be one of those. And then if you're like, I still need support, I want one-on-one support, I have a really good friend called Evan Barbie, or her name's Evan Barbie, and she does one-on-one typing sessions. She's the one I always recommend. I can't do one-on-ones, but she's incredible. So check out Evan Barbie. She's on Instagram, easy to find.
Perfect. And how can listeners connect with you? What are all your socials and your website, please?
Yeah. So I am enneagramandcoffee.com. I'm also Enneagram and Coffee on Instagram. And we have a podcast called Enneagram and Coffee as well.
So many different resources. And I'm
Mhm.
assuming on your podcast, you can delve deeper into some of the types and subtypes and
Mhm.
all of these things. So, for people that really want to take off and learn more, all of those wonderful resources. Okay, so last thing I'm going to ask you for is to leave us with one call to action for the week. So, what is one thing that my listeners can do to get to know themselves a little better this week?
Mhm. This week, I think I encourage you to take a few minutes in the morning and ask yourself, what does my heart, mind, body, and soul need today? And then see if you can give that to yourself.
Beautiful, easy, and it's free. So, definitely is something that you can start doing right away. What a great practice. Thank you so much, Sarah Jane, for joining me on Veggie Doctor Radio today. I hope that more people will now be curious and excited about the Enneagram, check out your resources, and through this process, get to know themselves a little bit better, accept themselves unconditionally, and also those around them. So, thank you so much. And I hope that you have a very plantastic day.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, veggie lover, I hope that you loved today's episode. Will you take a second and do me a huge favor? Please subscribe to my podcast so that you never miss an episode. You're the reason I'm here, and I want to share it all with you. Thank you for listening, and have a plantastic day.